Hello. Today, I'll be looking at Arvind Sharma's The Ruler's Case. The book offers a thorough research on the nexus of power, which went into the construction of discourses of representation about India over many centuries. At the outset, the author says that he will adopt and adapt the genealogy of Edward Said's Orientalism in the Indian context. This is followed through by a systematic engagement with the historical archive in the writings of the major colonial figures who were at the fountainhead of the discovery of ancient Indian learning. I'm well aware of the irony of the term discovery. The nativists could argue that access to these texts was never lost, as there was a very complex system of orality and circular repetition of narratives, reiterated in so many ways through regional folklore and ritual practices that it was impossible for the memory or knowledge of the text to ever disappear. However, against the multivalence of nativist transmission, the colonizers opposed a linearity in the appropriation of the ancient material, which resulted in selection of some texts at the expense of the whole corpus, simplification of complex cultural realities to fit their own understanding of the world, whose complexity escaped them, application of prejudicial lenses to limit the semantic potential of text and force them to comply with the prejudice which the conquering powers wish to see in order to advance their agenda. The first chapter looks at some of the major names associated with what was called the Oriental Revival. History remembers figures such as Max Muller and Macaulay as person and fixed positive quotes. But the author here traces the complex trajectory and circumstantial reasons for the creation of their various decrees about ancient India. For instance, we are surprised to learn that Max Muller never set foot in India, yet through the study of ancient Indian texts, he was at the same time overwhelmed and shocked by what he discovered. He was the one who first came up with the possibility of an Indo-Aryan common linguistic past upon discovering the linguistic similarities between Sanskrit and the European languages. When the word history is used, it has to be understood that far from being a solid, unchanging reality, history is a constructed discourse. The conditions in which the ancient texts were discovered, the intentions, distortions, appropriations, and usurpations by stalwarts like John Stuart Mill, William Jones, influenced their perspectives and subsequently that of generations of their readers and the world they wrote about. In the initial phase of British colonization, the author says, the translation of the Manusmriti, Bhagavad Gita, and Gita Govinda was encouraged from the need to acquire familiarity with Hindu customs, both for political and evangelical reasons. If India was to be converted to Christianity successfully, one needed to know more about Indian culture and society to successfully accomplish this mission. The Ruler's Case, page 24. The change in attitude came when the British were more secure in their colonization ventures. From Warren Hastings' humanitarian statement, we read, every accumulation of knowledge, and especially such as is obtained by communication with people over whom we exercise a dominion founded on the right of conquest, is useful to the state. It is the gain of humanity. It attracts and conciliates distant affections. It lessens the weight of the chains by which the natives are held in subjection. Gone was the humanitarian ideal by the time Charles Grant expressed the racial, cultural, and religious ideology, which would become the hallmark of both British administration and the Indological studies which would result from it. We cannot avoid recognizing in the people of Hindustan a race of men, lamentably degenerate and base, retaining but the feeblest sense of moral obligation, yet obstinate in their disregard of what they know to be right, governed by malevolent and licentious passions, strongly exemplifying the effects produced in society by great and general corruption of manners, and sunk in misery by their vices. Quote from the book, page 26. At this point, the questioning mind would be justified in querying how one could at the same time be studying a culture and be contemptuous of it. This paradox can be explained from the following statement of Max Muller, who thought that the antiquity of India had a lot to offer, but its presence offered images of feeble and degenerate societies. On this point, I would like to pause and remind ourselves that when the British occupied India in the 18th-19th century, it was a society which had already endured repeated waves of violent conquest from Central Asia. In a later chapter, the author does the same meticulous archival research with Islamic scholars as he does with British scholars. He seeks the historical truth from the words of the contemporary observers, and this is what Al-Biruni says of India. Mahmud of Ghazni utterly ruined the prosperity of the country and performed their wonderful exploits by which the Hindus became like atoms of dust scattered in all directions, and like a tale of old in the mouth of the people. This is the reason, too, why Hindu sciences have retired far away from those parts of the country conquered by us, and have fled to places which our hand cannot yet reach, to Kashmir, Benares, and other places. Ruler's Gaze, page 216. James Mill's The History of British India was published around 1818, adopted as the official textbook by the East India Company in their colleges, and thus influenced a whole generation of British administrators in India. Arvind Sharma calls his attitude the psychology of contempt. The best part of it is that James Mills never visited India, but still felt entitled enough to write his history of British India, and distort both administrative, cultural, as well as religious perceptions over multiple generations. The systematic cultural contempt is pervasive here, as Europe is implicitly understood to be the location of a superior epistemology. Here are his views. Whatever is worth seeing or hearing in India can be expressed in writing. As soon as everything of importance is expressed in writing, a man who is duly qualified may obtain more knowledge of India in 1 year in his closet in England than he could obtain during the course of the longest life by the use of his eyes and his ears in India. Mills was anticipating the famous literary, religious, and cultural contempt of Macaulay, who would influence the course of Indian education over many generations to create brown sahibs. His intention was to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern. A class of persons Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. The conjunction of administrative power and cultural contempt had their long-term impact on the selection and categorization of information through which India came to be represented. After an overview of the conjunction of political and cultural contexts of British cultural attitudes to India, the book focuses around some key themes and looks at the illusions, silence, and distortions around the following: illiteracy, legal inequality, thuggy, sati, caste, dowry, education. The Ruler's Gaze references scholarly research which have investigated the insidious role of colonial policies in overseeing the destruction of the native education system. The major point of reference here is Dharampal, the beautiful tree. She also looks at the solid reality of dowry deaths, and Veena Talwar Oldenburg's book title gives us an indication of what is at work here. Dowry murder, the imperial origins of a cultural crime. What I would like to focus on is the way the author has analyzed the bias, philology, and construction around the issue of caste, which has subsequently been internalized, bringing us to today's impasse on the matter. There are two recent studies of caste worth investigating. Nicholas Turk's Caste of Mind and Satish Sharma, Caste Conversion, a Colonial Conspiracy. Reviews of both books will be posted soon. But here I wish to summarize Arvind Sharma's philological investigation to show how a complex matter was linearized to fit into a predefined colonial narrative. From the decision to focus on specific texts, leave out others which presented the fluidity of identities, the simplification of concepts like Varna to fit Western understanding, the linearization of meaning in translating the famous Vedic verses about the creation of 4 types of men, which took out the multivalence of meaning to the blatant ignorance of the affective and emotional component of bhakti and practice, which makes the mention of the Lord's feet a momentous focus of emotion rather than content, so that the interpretation of the mythical parable of the creation of humankind from the body of the Earth Purush, with multiple layers of meaning, spiritual, mystical, affective, and social, becomes simplified to only one component to justify Western disdain for Indian thought. Another theme which recurs is that a series of Indologists, in wishing to reaffirm the entitled sense of cultural superiority, impose their made-up separation between us and them, and conferred separation where in fact fluid boundaries existed in the past. It is almost as though the successive waves of conquerors needed to construct a discursive barbarian in order to believe in themselves as civilized, and to this day this dichotomy has not been totally overcome. By a process of internalization of the outside gaze, the imposed vision became appropriated by the native elite, indoctrinated into Macaulay's Brown Sahib ideology, and has since then been used unquestioningly to shame Indian natives. The author is very careful not to paint a black and white portrait of these complicated issues. He has done a marvelous job in reviewing some of those ugly truths about power, discourse, and manipulation, which are still actively perpetrated to this day. As the saying goes, in order to fight something, you need to be able to concretely define it. I invite you all to check the book on Arvind Sharma, The Ruler's Gaze, and you won't be disappointed with the extensive archival research which the author brings into this piece of research on these burning issues. We hope you have enjoyed this review. Until next time, goodbye.